Hey everyone, welcome to Everyday Shed. I'm Carlos. In today's video, we are building the floor and the walls of a 6x12 shed, a very similar design to the Tuff shed. And to top it off, I'm gonna share with you a set of free building plans that you can follow along with the video, making this build a very easy and approachable project. And to start building this shed, first we need to set up the footers for our sheds. This part will be different for everyone. If you have a concrete or a level gravel pad, you won't need these concrete blocks. But for me, I have uneven ground and I use these concrete blocks to level the spots so I can place my skids and start building my floor. Before you go too far, make sure that the skids, which are these 4x4 pressure treated lumber, is actually 12 feet long. You might need to trim off an inch or so from the ends to get to the right size. And remember, whenever you cutting pressure treated lumber, you need to retreat the ends. That's because the wood is only treated on the outside, so cutting exposes to the raw wood. The goal is to have 3 concrete blocks or filler under each skid. This will give the skids a support every 6 feet. Both skids need to be level, and to get them level, you're gonna need to mix blocks and pressure treated boards to adjust the height. Next, we need to cut our floor joist. Just like the skids, remember that when you cut pressure treated lumber, you need to retreat the ends. I'm using 2x6 pressure treated wood for the floor joist. And first, we'll frame the box to get started. And then we anchor the box to the skids by toe nailing them in place. I'm going to place a floor joist every 16 inches. Make sure to mark both sides evenly. Then I'll lay the floor joist inside the box so each end sits directly on top of the skid. When picking and laying the floor joist, make sure to check which side has the crown or which side is bent upwards. You want the crown facing up, not down. Next, line up the center of each joist with the layout mark you made on the ends. I choose to drive 3 nails on the end of each joist to hold it in place. You're going to want to repeat these to all of the joists on both ends. Check the outside joist to make sure aligns with the skid. If it's off, you can drive a screw onto the rim joist and pull it in with a hammer. Once it's aligned, you toe nail it to the skid, making sure it's secure. Alright, now that we finished framing this floor, let's talk about how this differentiates from a Tuff shed building. A Tuff shed is going to have a steel galvanized flooring system. In here, I decided to use 2x6 pressure treated lumber because that's a much more DIY friendly approach. You can find lumber pretty much in any hardware store. However, if you want to go to the steel approach, as long as you can source it through your local building supply, the setup should be pretty similar. The only other difference you're going to notice is that Tuff Shed places their joist every 24 inches. But in this building, we are doing every 16 inches. That's going to provide a more sturdy floor system for the shed. I recommend that you add adhesive to the joist before laying down the floorboards. Any type of construction adhesive will make the floor stronger and help prevent squeaks. But if you're buying adhesive, might as well buy a specific one for flooring. Once you lay down the subflooring, try not to move it around so you don't mess with the adhesive. You might notice that the floor isn't square yet, but now is when we're going to square it up. First, make sure that one side is flush with the ring joist. On the adjacent side, you square with the factory edge of the subflooring. This will give you a square frame without the hassle of measuring anything. This 6x12 shed will use a total of 2 tubes of subflooring adhesive and 3 sheets of 4x8 subflooring. Remember, with our free build plans, you can also get the full material list. The material list itself, it's a huge time saver. It will cut down the trips to the hardware store. So be sure to check out the link in the description, or if you're watching this on your TV, just point your phone's camera to the QR code on the screen to check it out. And now that the floor is built, it's time to start building the walls. The first thing we do is lay out on the bottom plate where the studs are gonna go. And according to the build plans, we're gonna set them every 16 inches apart. And on the end walls, we're gonna have a stud sideways. To help the stud stay in place, I use a couple pieces of scrap lumber. And I drive 2 nails on the end of the stud. The first wall we're building will have a higher end of about 7 feet 5 inches and a lower end of 6 feet. Using a chalk line, I'll mark the position of every stud in between that needs to be cut. The studs in the middle will all need to be cut at an angle. And to do this, you take your circular saw and set it to 12.5 degree angle, which is between the 10 and 15 degree marks on your saw. Next, you lift up the 2x4s in place. You prop it up either with your foot or a piece of scrap lumber. And using a speed square, you align the saw straight and cut the 2x4. If this feels awkward or difficult, you can lay out the 2x4s against the bottom plate first without nailing them and mark all the cuts. That way you can cut the 2x4 beforehand. Next, we'll bring in the top plate and lay it against the studs. Both ends of the top plate, it's gonna have the same angle as the studs, so don't adjust your circular saw just yet. Since this is a 6-foot wall, keep checking that the studs are 6 feet apart. And once you have the top plate nailed in place, the studs in between should match the same distance as the bottom plate. Now we're gonna sheet the wall before we even set it in place. I prefer this method because it's easier to square the wall and nail the sheet properly. For this design, the build plan calls for a 1-inch overhang on the bottom plate. Once the sheeting is on, it's time to square up the wall before nailing it down completely. And thanks to the factory edge of the sheeting, we can line it up with the studs to get a nice square wall. Next, we'll bring in the second sheet to finish up this 6-foot wall. When overlapping the sheeting, make sure to drive a nail between the 2 sheets. And lastly, using a chalk line, I mark along the top plate and run a circular saw, cutting any excess. Since this is a small shed, we're gonna set this wall aside so we can move on working on the next walls. The side wall, it's exactly the same. The only difference is that it's a mirror image of the first wall. And once you have the second wall completely built, set it aside just like the first one. The third wall to be built is the front wall. And we start by laying out a marking on the bottom and top plates according to the build plans. This front wall is going to be 6 feet tall and have a door right in the center. First, we nail the studs to the top plate. Then we're going to locate and nail where the door is going to be right on the center of the wall. For the door header, I'm using 2x4 studs and supporting them with the jack stud on each end. And don't forget that you still need the double top plate nailed after you're done nailing the wall. Once that's done, slide the wall forward so there's room to work on the bottom plate. And when working on the bottom plate, just remember each stud gets 2 nails on the bottom. Now it's time to add the sheeting to the front wall. And just like with the side walls, we're gonna use the factory edge cuts of the sheeting to square up the wall. And since the front wall is only 6 feet tall, there's gonna be some excess that needs to be cut on the top. And be sure to save whatever you cut from the door opening because we're gonna use this piece later on to build a door. And now we are framing the last wall, which is the back wall. We start by laying out the studs and make sure they are 16 inches apart from center to center. If you're unsure and need help, don't worry, we have the free building plans showing exactly how to lay out everything step by step. And once you have the studs in place, remember, you still have to nail a double top plate. It's important to nail everything, make sure it's secure until it's finished. With the framing complete of the last wall, it's time to sheet the whole wall. The good news is that once this wall is nice and square, it takes 3 full sheets to cover up the wall with no cuts needed. Okay, now it's time to lift up all the walls and set them in place. The first wall I'm gonna do, it's the back wall. I'm gonna lift up towards the back. And then underneath, you notice there's the front wall. So then we lift that up next. But before you get started, I recommend getting some help because the back wall should be pretty heavy. If not, just make sure that you protect yourself. You set some cleats on the back and have your tools ready to nail them down as soon as you set the wall in place. Wall will be the heaviest of all 4 walls. And after I flipped it up, I just need to move a few inches to the left to make sure it was centered. And then I added a small piece of blocking to the wall to keep it in place. And once I was happy with the position, I drove 2 nails on each bay going down the wall to secure it. The front wall is a little bit lighter, but in the end, I didn't have enough room to lift it in place. So I added a couple blocks on the side of the shed and placed the wall on top of those blocks. And then I was able to lift up the wall in place, and this has worked out really well. The side walls are super easy. If everything is squared like it should be, it goes smoothly. Set the wall on top of the supporting 2x4s and then lift the wall into place. You're going to nail the siding onto the opposite wall. And on the inside, you're going to have to nail the wall down with 2 nails on each bay. Remember that the walls are still not connected to each other, so you're going to have to push the walls in until they are plumbed, and then you're going to nail the top plates onto the opposite wall. You're going to do the same thing for the last wall. And now you're starting to see the 6x12 taking shape. There are a couple modifications I made to this design that I like to share with you guys. First, I added a couple 2x4s to the corners of the shed. That's to keep more stability. As you lift up the wall, it's not too shaky. And second, I did move the door from the side of the shed to the front. I believe that's a better use of the door and the shed itself. And if you like this design, I totally recommend you checking out the free build plans that we have available. So go to this QR code right here or the link in the description. That set of build plans has all the steps that you need to take to completely build this shed, including all the materials you need to purchase. That really helps you out if you're trying to build a shed like this yourself. And if you're not trying to build yourself, you want to purchase, there's also a build versus buy guide built into those plans that you can go through and figure out what's the best option for you. And now that the walls are framed, it's time to throw on the rafters and the roofing deck. If you want to check that out next, there's a video for you right here. If you want to check out the whole thing from beginning to end, there's a video for you right here. And I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.